One could argue that Corwin Alder lost his kingdom the night he let 3 men in fine coats talk him out of trusting the one person who had never lied to him. But that would be generous, because it would suggest the loss was quick. It was not. He lost it slowly, the way a riverbank loses itself to the water, a grain at a time, each grain so small that a man might stand on the shrinking ground and swear he was not moving at all. And if one wished to be truly fair about the whole affair, one would have to admit that Sable Vache handed him every chance to keep it, right up until the morning she stopped handing him anything at all, and simply walked north into the cold with a map she had drawn herself. So, his fault then, all of it. Though it would take him the better part of a year to learn how to say so. The Reach did not forgive easily, and Sable Vache had made her peace with that long ago. She had ridden its passes since she was 16, and she knew the borderlands the way other wardens knew their own hands. Better, because hands did not shift with the thaw or hide their intentions behind a fold of rock. The outer packs lived where the Crown's roads gave out, and the Crown's interest gave out a good deal sooner. When a grain shipment failed to arrive, when a feud threatened to spill blood across 2 valleys, when a winter came harder than the harvest had planned for, it was not the king who rode up the switchbacks to sort it. It was Sable. One woman, a quiet horse, and a reputation for being impossible to lie to. That last part was not magic, though the packs liked to whisper that it was. It was only attention. Sable watched, the way a hawk watched, without hurry and without mercy, and people who were about to deceive her tended to feel it and think better of the attempt. She had brokered 11 truces in 6 years and broken none of them. She had walked into a barn where 4 armed men meant to kill a 5th, and walked out with all 5 alive, and a signed agreement about a well. She was not loved everywhere in the Reach, but she was trusted, which lasted longer than love, and asked for less. The message that changed things came down from Halvery on a gray morning at the end of the mud season, carried by a rider whose horse was worth more than most of the houses in the valley. He rode through. The king wished to see her. Not the steward, not the master of boarders, not some undersecretary with a seal and a grievance. The king himself, Corwin Alder, who had held the crown 2 years and whom Sable had never once met, wanted the border warden of the Reach to attend him at the seat of the realm. Bram O'Let, who was 14 and ran messages between the high passes for the price of his supper, watched her read it twice. "Is it trouble?" he asked. "It's always trouble," Sable said. "The only question is, whose?" She folded the letter along its crease and tucked it into her coat, and she did not tell the boy that her hands, which had been steady over a knife and steadier over a lie, had gone strangely uncertain at the sight of the royal seal. Because there was a thing about the Reach that the crown did not know, and it was this: the people out here had begun, quietly, to stop waiting for Halvery at all. They brought their disputes to Sable. They brought their bad winters and their broken bargains to the Council of Pack Mothers. She had helped them seat, 3 summers running, in a stone hall with no throne in it. Nobody had planned a rebellion, nobody had even used the word. They had simply discovered that a thing tended to get fixed faster when the person fixing it lived close enough to smell the smoke. And now the king had noticed something. She could not tell what or how much. But kings did not summon border wardens to praise them, and the ones who summoned a warden 3 days' ride from her own passes generally wanted something a warden would be wise to refuse. She left at first light with 3 days' food and the good horse, and she told Maeve Tor, who had taught her to read a trail before she could read a word, to mind the council hall until she returned. "If I return," she said, half a joke. Maeve did not smile. She was old enough to have watched 2 kings come and go, and she had a way of looking at a young person that made them feel the weight of every year she had on them. "You'll return," she said. "The question is what you'll be carrying when you do." She pressed something into Sable's palm, a token, a small disc of pale horn, scored with the crossed lines the border packs used to mark a boundary stone. "So you remember where the edge of your own land is," Maeve said. "Kings have a talent for making a body forget." I've never yet forgotten a border in my life. You've never yet stood inside a room built to make you. Maeve closed Sable's fingers over the disc. Halvery is a border too. Girl, it just doesn't put its line where you can see it. Sable rode south for 2 days out of the mountains, and into the soft green country that fed the crown, and with every mile the land grew richer, and the people grew stranger to her, until she came over a last rise, and saw Halvery laid out below her, in the valley, white-walled and gold-roofed and utterly certain of itself. It did not look like a place that lost surveyors. It looked like a place that had never once in its life been told no. She had never, in her life, felt so far from home. And she did not yet know that the man waiting behind those walls would, within the season, hand her a reason to build a home that no king could summon her away from ever again. The seed of the realm was built to make a person feel small, and Sable, who did not feel small in blizzards or in barns full of armed men, felt the trick of it working on her the moment she passed under the gate. Everything was scaled a little larger than a body needed. The doors, the windows, the height of the ceilings, the length of the walk from the outer yard to the inner hall, all of it stretched just past the human, so that anyone crossing it arrived at the center, already reminded of their own smallness. Sable noticed the technique and refused to give it the satisfaction. She had crossed worse ground. She kept her back straight and her pace even, and she counted her steps, which was a habit she had kept since childhood, for staying calm, and she was on step 400 and something, when the doors of the audience hall opened, and she saw the king for the first time. He was younger than she had expected and more tired. The portraits, she would learn, had given him a hard jaw and a conqueror's stare, and the jaw was real enough, but the stare was not. What Corwin Alder actually had was a way of looking at a problem as though it were personally disappointing him, and just now the problem appeared to be a stack of papers a clerk was murmuring over at his elbow. 3 men in fine coats stood near the dais. One of them, silver at the temples and sharp all over, watched Sable cross the floor with the particular interest of a man appraising livestock he suspected of being overpriced. "The border warden," the king said, when she reached the foot of the dais. He set the papers aside. "Sable Vosh, you've had a long ride. 3 days, Majesty. The reach doesn't lend itself to shortcuts." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." And then, unexpectedly, he came down off the dais. Not far, 1 step, 2, enough that he was no longer looking at her from the manufactured height of the throne, and the sharp man at the side of the hall did not care for it at all. She saw the small tightening at the corner of his mouth. "I've read reports about you for a year," Corwin went on. "Truces, wells, a feud in the Carn Valley that should have taken an army, and instead took 1 woman and an afternoon. I confess I didn't believe half of it." "You shouldn't believe more than half of anything from that distance, Majesty." Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of surprise that resolved, against what she suspected was his better judgment, into the beginning of a smile. "No," he said again, more quietly. "I don't suppose I should." That was the moment. She would return to it many times in the months that came, after turning it over, testing it, because that was the moment she understood 2 things at once that she would very much rather not have understood. The first was that the king was not a fool, which made everything more dangerous, because fools were predictable and clever men were not. And the second was worse and simpler, and she buried it as fast as she could, that when he stopped performing the throne and simply looked at her, plainly, like one person taking the measure of another, something in her chest shifted that had no business shifting in a room like this one. She had come expecting to defend the reach against a crown that wanted to tighten its grip. She had not come expecting the crown to have a face she would have to work, not to look at. "I'll be direct," Corwin said, straightening. "Because I'm told you've no patience for the other kind. There's a road being built through the eastern passes, a trade road to open the reach to the lowland markets. It's the largest thing the crown has attempted in the borderlands in 50 years. and it is going badly. Surveyors turned back, supply carts vanishing, a foreman dead, in what my counsel calls an accident, and I do not. His jaw did the thing the portraits had caught. I need someone who knows that country and cannot be bought by anyone in it. My counsel assures me no such person exists. Your counsel hasn't spent much time in the Reach. My counsel, he said, with the faintest dryness, has not spent much time anywhere. The wine is bad. Behind him, the silver-templed man's expression did not change, which was itself a kind of answer. Will you take it? Find out why my road is eating the men I send to build it. Report to me. Only to me. And there it was laid on the marble between them. A thing she wanted, and a thing she distrusted, in the same package, the way the most dangerous offers always came. The road could break the Reach open like an egg, pour the lowland markets and the lowland troubles straight up her quiet passes. Or it could be the making of the outer packs, if it were built honestly, by someone who cared how. She thought of the pale horn disc in her coat pocket, and the crossed lines scored into it, and of Maeve saying that Halvery was a boarder too. I'll find out what's killing your road, Majesty, she said. But I answer to the Reach first and the Crown second. If those two ever point different directions, you should know now which way I'll ride. The sharp man made a small sound of affront. The king did not. The king looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not read, and then he said, I'd trust you a great deal less if you'd answered any other way. He glanced toward the men in fine coats. Lord Ferris disagrees. Lord Ferris disagrees with most things I find promising, so that was the sharp one's name. Ferris Quell inclined his head a precise degree, and said in a voice like a door easing shut, I only observe, Majesty, that a woman who tells you to your face she'll defy you has told you something worth remembering. He smiled at Sable, and it was a courteous smile, and it did not touch any other part of his face. We'll all remember it, I'm sure. She held his eyes a beat longer than was polite, because that was how you told a man you had heard the second thing under the first. He did not look away either. Two people who read faces for a living, taking each other's measure across a marble floor, and neither of them liking the sum. They gave her a room that could have housed a family of 6, and she slept badly in it. And in the morning she went to find the maps. If a road was killing the men sent to build it, the road would say so, and roads spoke in maps. Sable had learned to read them, the way she read faces, watching not only what they showed, but what they took pains to leave out. The Crown's map room was a marvel, a long gallery of oak tables under high windows, every valley and vein of the realm inked in colors that had cost someone a fortune. She spread the survey of the eastern passes across the largest table and bent over it, and within the hour she had found the first lie. The road did not go where the land wanted it to go. Any warden could have told the surveyors that the low route through the Sedge Valley was gentler, safer, half the labor. Instead, the planned road climbed hard to the north through the narrow throat of a pass called the Wend, over ground that would fight a cart the whole way. There was no honest reason for it. A road was a promise a kingdom made to itself about where it meant to go, and this one had been drawn by someone who meant to go somewhere the kingdom would not have chosen. Sable had bent closer, tracing the northern route with one finger, when a voice behind her said, You found it faster than the surveyors did. They took a month. She did not startle. She had heard the door. But she straightened slowly and turned, and the king was standing at the end of the table in a plain coat, with no crown on him at all, and for a disorienting moment he was simply a tired man in a room full of maps, and she had to remind herself who he was. The road's wrong, she said. It's built to climb when it should descend. Somebody wanted it up in the North Passes. Somebody, Corwin agreed, coming to stand across the table from her, who owns a great deal of the North Passes and stands to grow very rich the moment a crown road runs through them. He did not say the name. He didn't have to. She was already thinking of a courteous smile that hadn't reached a single other part of a face. I've suspected it for months. I couldn't prove it. Every man I sent to survey the honest route came back, turned around, or didn't come back at all. Because the honest route puts the road past land that isn't his, Sable said, following it. And a crown road that makes the wrong man rich is worth killing surveyors over. She looked down at the beautiful lying map, and something cold and clear settled over her. The feeling she got at the start of every truce, that was going to be harder than it looked. You already know who. You need someone who can bring you the how, laid out so plain that even a council full of his friends can't argue it away. Yes, Corwin said simply. Then I'll need to ride the true route myself. The Sedge Valley, the whole of it, with my own eyes, and no crown escort tramping ahead of me, announcing I'm coming. She rolled the map as she spoke. Decisive now, the uncertainty of the audience hall burned off her. Give me 3 weeks and a free hand, and I'll bring you the reason your road is a graveyard. He was watching her roll the map with an expression that had gone oddly still, and when she looked up and caught it, he did not look away in time. It was the same plain, unguarded look from the dais, the one that turned something over in her, except now there was no throne behind him and no court around them, only the two of them and a table of maps and the long gold light coming down through the high windows. You do that, he said, and his voice had roughened very slightly. You look at a thing everyone else has stared at for a month and you simply see it. He stopped, as though he had said more than he meant to. It's rarer than anything I have in this house. It's only attention, majesty, Corwin, he said. In this room, when there's no one to perform for, I'd rather you called me Corwin. And Sable, who had told a king to his face that she would defy him, found that she could not for the life of her think of a single steady thing to say, and the silence stretched warm and dangerous between them, until far off in the great house, a bell began to toll an alarm, and both their heads came up at once. And the long gold quiet of the map room shattered into whatever was coming next. The bell was a false alarm, or near enough. A stable fire in the outer yard, caught early, no one hurt, and, by the time Sable reached the yard, with her hand already on her knife, it was only smoke and shouting and a groom weeping over a scorched tack room. She stood in the churn of it and watched, because watching was what she did, and what she saw was that the fire had started in the one corner of the yard where the survey records for the eastern road were kept when they were not in the map room. The strong box stood open, it was empty. Convenient, she said to no one. I was going to use a stronger word. Corwin had come down into the yard behind her, and the court had come with him. A knot of fine coats keeping their hems out of the ash, Ferris Quell among them, with his hands folded and his face arranged into exactly the right amount of concern. My survey records, the king said, loud enough to carry. Gone. What a great pity. A pity, Ferris agreed. Though one wonders, Majesty, whether they told us much we didn't have. Old paper. The warden here has already found what the surveyors missed, I'm told. Perhaps the fire has done us the favor of clearing away the clutter. He said it smoothly, and a few of the coats murmured agreement, and Sable understood that she had just watched a man burn the evidence against him and then suggest in front of the king that its loss was a convenience. It was so brazen it was almost admirable. It told her something too. Ferris Quell was not afraid of Corwin, which meant Corwin, king or not, did not yet hold enough to make him afraid. She said nothing. She had learned young that the moment to speak was almost never the moment you most wanted to. But she marked the faces in that yard, the ones who murmured for Ferris, and the ones who stayed silent, and she saw how few of them looked to the king at all. As though the crown were a piece of furniture, the room had grown used to walking around. That was the true fire, she thought, not the tack room, the slow one, the kind that ate a house from the inside, while everyone stood admiring the paint. She filed the open strong box away with everything else, And that night she left Helvery quietly, by a side gate, alone, on the good horse, and rode east for the Sedge Valley, to find the thing that paper could no longer tell her. The writing steadied her, it always had. 3 days out from the crown seat, the soft green country gave way to the hard, honest ground she knew, and she felt herself return to her own size, neither smaller nor larger than a woman on a horse with a job to do. She rode the true route, the low road through the sedge that the surveyors should have chosen, and she read the valley like a page, good water, gentle grade, a ford that had carried carts for 100 years. She stopped at a herder's fire the second night and traded news for salt, and the herder, not knowing her for anything but a traveler, told her that men had come the year before to walk the high Wend with chains and instruments, and that 2 of them had gone up a scree slope in good weather, and only 1 had come down, and that the pack up there had learned to stop asking the crown questions, because the crown sent back only more men with chains. There was no reason on the earth to send a road climbing north into the Wend. No reason but the one that wore a courteous smile, and by the 4th day she had the shape of it whole. What she had not expected was to look up from a stream bed on the 5th evening and find the king sitting his horse on the ridge above her alone, in a plain coat, watching her with the last of the light behind him. "You are not," she said, climbing up to him, "supposed to be here." "No," Corwin agreed. "My council believes I am shut in my chambers, with a headache." He looked almost young out here, out from under the weight of the house. "I have spent 2 years being told what my own borderlands are like by men who have never seen them. I wanted to see the thing I was sending you to die in, with my own eyes. Is that so strange? It's reckless. You've no guard. I have you." "You have me at a disadvantage," Sable said before she had decided to, "and you know it, and I think you enjoy it." And to her surprise, he laughed, a real one. Surprised out of him, nothing like the measured warmth he spent on the court, and the sound of it did something to the cold evening air, and to her, that she chose not to examine. They made a small fire in the lee of the ridge, because it was too late for him to ride back, and too foolish to try. Why? She showed him how to bank it, so the wind off the pass would not eat it, and he watched her hands and copied them, clumsy and careful, a king learning to keep his own warmth alive for the first time in his life. And it was there, with the Sedge Valley going blue and then black below them, and the fire the only warm thing for a mile, that Corwin Alder stopped being the crown for a while. He told her about the brother who should have had the throne and had died of a fever at 19, leaving it to a second son who had never been trained to won it. He told her how it felt to sit in a hall full of men who had served his father, and to know that every one of them thought he was a placeholder for a better king they had not yet found. He told her that he trusted almost no one, and that the few he had trusted had mostly taught him why he shouldn't. "And yet," Sable said, "you rode out alone to sit at a fire with a woman who told you she'd defy you." "Yes," he said. The fire moved in his eyes. "I've been trying to work out why that felt safer than my own throne room." He was quiet a moment. "I think it's that you want nothing from me. Everyone in that house wants something. You want your reach left alone. It's the most honest thing anyone's offered me in 2 years, and it isn't even offered to me. It's offered against me." He shook his head slowly. "I find I don't mind. I find I'd rather be defied honestly than served the other way." "That's an easy thing to say, by a fire, Majesty." She said it gently, but she said it. "It's a harder thing to mean in a room full of men who serve you the other way, when the honesty is standing in front of you costing you something. Most men like the idea of being defied a great deal more than the fact of it." He looked at her across the flames, and for a moment something in his face went careful, as though she'd set a finger on a bruise he hadn't known was there. "You think I'll fold? I think you've never once had to choose between the honest thing and the safe one where anyone was watching. I think you don't yet know which you are." "I don't think you know either." She fed a stick to the fire. "I'm not saying it to wound you. I'm saying it because I've decided to find out, and I'd rather you knew I was looking. He was quiet for a long time after that. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its ease. If I fold, he said, you'll be the one standing in front of me, costing me something. Yes, that's a poor bargain for you. Most of my bargains are. She looked at him, this tired young man who had been handed a crown like a debt, and she felt the thing in her chest turn over all the way, and she did not stop it in time. Get some sleep, Majesty. It's a long ride back to being king. He held her eyes one moment longer than he needed to. Corwin, he said. Corwin, she agreed, barely above the fire's crackle, and neither of them slept for a long while after, each of them lying awake on their own side of the small warmth, listening to the other pretend. She brought him his proof, 11 days later, and it was everything he had asked for, and more than he was ready to hear. Sable laid it out on the map-room table, the way she laid out a truce, plainly, in order, giving him no room to look away, the true route through the sedge, gentle and cheap, the false route north through the Wend, brutal and dear. The deeds, copied in her own hand, from a land registry, 3 valleys deep in the reach, that showed every mile of the northern passes, bought quietly over the last 2 years through 4 different names that all paid their taxes to one house. The House of Quell. He's been buying the ground your road will make valuable, she said. Before anyone knew there'd be a road, he steered the survey north to run it straight through land he'd already bought. And the men who died found that out, or got close. And the Wend is a very easy place to have an accident. She set down the last paper. That's your how, laid so plain a child could follow it. Your foreman didn't fall. He was pushed by a man named Orm Kett, who is paid out of a quell purse, and who has a brother in the low country he'd like to see grow old. He'll say all of it, but not in Halvery. He'll only say it somewhere. Ferris Quell's reach can't silence him first. Corwin stood over the papers for a long time without touching them. She watched the proof land on him, watched him understand that it was real and complete, and that it named a man his own father had trusted, a man half his council would bleed for. You've done in 3 weeks, he said at last, what my whole survey office couldn't do in a year. I had less to lose by finding it, no. He looked up, and there was something fierce in it now, something that had been waiting under the tiredness the whole time. You had more. This is your reach, your passes, your people, the accidents would have kept happening to. You could have brought me half of this, and kept your head down, and I'd never have known the difference. You brought me all of it. He came around the table. Why? Because you asked me to only answer to you, Sable said. And because, God's help me, I've decided you meant it. They were very close now. The gold light was coming down through the high windows, the way it had the first day, and the papers that could end a great house lay between them. And neither of them was looking at the papers. She could see the pulse in his throat. She could see him decide, and undecide, and decide. Again, Sable, he said, rough. Tell me to go back to being king, and I will. Tell me there's a crown between us, and I'll stand here and be the crown. Or, she said. He kissed her. And every careful, watchful thing in Sable, every instinct that had kept her alive, in barns full of knives, went quiet all at once, because there was nothing in this to watch for. There was no lie in it, no angle, no throne. There was only a tired man who had ridden out alone to sit at her fire, holding her face in both hands like something he had stopped, expecting to be allowed, and the long gold light, and the proof of a great man's ruin, scattered forgotten, across the table beside them. She had spent her whole life being trusted and needed and relied upon. She had never once, that she could remember, been simply wanted. It undid her more thoroughly than any danger ever had. This changes nothing about the reach, she managed, against his mouth. I know, I'll still ride against you if you make me. I know, he said, and she felt him smile. it's half the reason. Now stop negotiating, and let me do this properly. And she did. And for a while, there was no crown, no counsel, no courteous smile, waiting in the dark of the great house. Only the two of them and the gold light and a quiet that felt for the first time in either of their lives entirely safe. She lay awake afterward with his heartbeat under her ear and let herself do a dangerous thing, which was to imagine a version of her life that had this in it, not instead of the reach, but somehow beside it. And the imagining was so sweet and so unguarded that some old warden's instinct stirred in her sleep and did not quite wake. And did not quite settle either, which was of course exactly when it was most dangerous. Ferris Quell did not run. That was the first sign that Sable had badly misjudged how the day would go. She had expected, when the king laid the proof before his full council, that a cornered man would bolt or bluster. Instead, Ferris Quell sat with his hands folded and listened to his own ruin read aloud, the deeds, the 4 names, the steered survey, and when Corwin finished, in the ringing silence of a hall full of men who had just heard a peer accused of murder, Ferris Quell simply smiled his courteous smile and said, "And who brought His Majesty this remarkable collection of papers?" "That doesn't matter," Corwin said. "I think it matters a great deal," said Ferris, rising now unhurried, turning not to the king but to the council, to the 24 men who had served the old king and mistrusted the new one. A road, the crown planned. A great house accused, and the only witness a border warden from the deep reach, a woman who has told His Majesty to his face that she serves her mountains before her crown. Who says so proudly, "He let that settle"? My lords, we are asked to destroy one of our own, on the word of a woman who has every reason to want the crown's road stopped. The crown's road that would open her precious reach to lowland law and lowland taxes. Ask yourselves who profits if this road dies in scandal. Ask yourselves whose ground stays closed and whose little mountain council keeps its quiet power. I have bought land. Yes. Is buying land a crime now? Show me the hand that pushed your foreman. Show me a face that is not this woman's word. And Sable watched it work. She watched the doubt move through the hall, like cold through a house, man by man, and she understood, far too late, the trap she had walked into. She had brought proof of a paper crime. She could not, standing in this room, produce the killer, because Ormket would only speak far away and under guard, and every hour of delay let Ferris fill the silence with a simpler story, that a mountain woman with a grudge had gulled a young king who was, everyone agreed, so very eager to be clever. She had built her case for a courtroom. Ferris had emptied it into a rumor, and a rumor did not need proof. It needed only enough men who wanted it true. She turned to Corwin, and this was the moment. She would come back to it 1,000 times in the cold months after, the way he came back to the fire on the ridge. She looked at the king and she waited for him to say the thing that would end it. That he had ridden the sedge himself, that he had seen the true road with his own eyes, that this warden had shown him nothing he had not already begun to see. One sentence. The truth. He had been there. He knew. He did not say it. She saw him weigh it, saw the calculation move behind his eyes, the young king counting the 24 men who would ask why he had ridden out alone and in secret to the borderlands with this woman, what it would look like, what it would cost him with a council that already thought him a placeholder. She saw the fire on the ridge go through him, and she saw him set it down because it was too heavy to carry, in front of these men. She saw him choose the crown. "The matter needs more proof," Corwin said, to the room in the smooth performed voice she had not heard him use since the first day. "We'll adjourn. The warden's findings will be reviewed." The word landed in her like a blade going in slow. He would not look at her. That was the thing she could not forgive. Not the caution, not even the choice, but that he could not make himself look at her while he made it. The man who had said he would rather be defied honestly, who had asked her by the fire whether he would fold and been told he did not yet know which man he was, had learned the answer in front of an audience, and could not bear to watch her learn it too. He sat on his manufactured height and let a murderer walk out smiling, because trusting her out loud, in front of his court, cost more than he was willing to pay. Ferris Quell bowed to the king, and on his way from the hall he passed close to Sable and murmured, for her alone, in his easing door voice, "You should go home, Warden, while you still have one to go to." And she understood it for exactly the threat it was. She found Corwin an hour later in the map room, standing over the table where he had kissed her. And he turned when she came in and started to speak, and she saw the apology already forming and could not bear it. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me you'll fix it. Don't tell me you needed more time. You were on that ridge. You saw the road. You knew. And when the price came due, you decided my word wasn't worth what it cost you to say you believed it." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that. Later. "I told you by that fire that you didn't know which man you were. I said I'd rather you knew I was looking. Well, I looked, and now we both know." Sable. He came toward her. "Give me a season. I'll build the case so no one can." "You had the case." She stepped back, and he stopped, exactly as he had stopped on the dais the first day, and she hated that she'd taught him that. "You had me. You just weren't willing to be seen holding me." She set something down on the map table between them, small and pale, the horn disc scored with crossed lines, the boundary token Meave had pressed into her palm a lifetime ago. "So you remember where the edge of your own land is. Kings have a talent for making a body forget. Keep it," she said, "to remember where the edge of mine was. I won't need reminding again." "If you walk out of this house," he said, low, "Ferris will take it as the crown blinking. He'll move on me within the year. Then you'd best find the courage you couldn't find today, and find it fast." It was not kind. She did not mean it to be. You had a warden who could not be lied to and could not be bought, and you spent her the moment keeping her cost you something. "Don't tell me about your year, Corwin. You chose your year." And Sable Vosh walked out of the map room, and out of the great lying house, and north into the cold, toward the only country that had never once asked her to be smaller than she was, and she did not look back to see the king standing among his beautiful maps with a boundary stone in his hand, learning for the first time, and far too late, exactly where the edge of what he'd thrown away had been. Sable did not weep on the road north. She had decided that somewhere around the 2nd mile, and she held to it the way she held to a truce, which was to say completely and without any expectation of comfort. The country hardened around her as she climbed, and she let it. By the time she came up out of the last green valley, and into the gray teeth of the reach, the soft south was behind her, and something in her had gone quiet and clear. She was not going home to lick a wound. A wounded animal did that, and Sable Vosh was not an animal. She was a warden, and a warden's whole art was to look at a broken thing and see, underneath the break, the shape of what could be built instead. And she had seen a great deal in Halvery that a warden could use. She had seen a king who could not hold his own counsel. She had seen 24 fine coats who mistrusted their crown and served it only from habit. She had seen a great house buy up a borderland in silence, because no one out here had the standing to say no to a lowland lord. And she had seen, most of all, the thing she had always half known and never let herself finish thinking, that the crown did not protect the reach, had never protected the reach, and that the only thing that had ever protected the reach was the reach deciding to protect itself. One truce, and one well, and one hard winter at a time. Maeve Tor was waiting at the council hall when she rode in, as though she had never left, as though she had known to the hour. She looked at Sable's face and did not ask what had happened, because Maeve had watched 2 kings come and go, and she could read a returned warden the way Sable read a valley. "He made you smaller," Maeve said. "It was not a question." "He tried." Sable swung down off the good horse, and her legs held, and her voice held, and she found that the cold, clear thing in her had a shape now, and the shape was enormous. "You told me Halvery was a border that didn't put its line where I could see it. You were right. The line runs straight through the middle of that man. On one side of it he means every word. On the other side, there's a room full of people watching. And the word he means cost too much, so he doesn't say it. She pulled off her riding gloves, finger by finger. I'm done living on the far side of other people's courage, Maeve. Call the pack mothers. All of them, not just the near valleys. The far ones too. The Carn and the Sedge and the high holds that haven't sat a council in a generation. Maeve went very still. That's a great deal of horn to blow over one man who wouldn't look at you. It isn't about the man. And it wasn't. Quite. Though Sable was honest enough with herself to know the man had lit the match. We've been fixing our own troubles, and bringing our own truces and seating our own council for 3 summers. And every one of us has still, in the back of our hearts, been waiting for Halvery to notice and make it real. I stood in that house, and I understood that Halvery is never going to notice, because Halvery can't even govern itself. We've been waiting for a permission that is never coming from people who couldn't grant it if they tried. So we stop waiting. We make ourselves real. Maeve was quiet a moment. That's a word with a rope on the end of it, girl. Then we won't use the word. Sable smiled, and it was not a warm smile, but it was a true one. The first true thing she'd felt since the gold light. We won't declare anything. We won't raise a banner. We won't so much as write the crown a letter it could take offense at. We'll just build the thing so well and so quietly that by the time anyone in the South thinks to be frightened of it, the Reach will already run on it, and taking it apart would cost more than any crown can pay. She looked out through the open door at the grey holds, climbing into the mountains, valley above valley, each one a piece. A kingdom doesn't need a king, Maeve. It needs a thing that works when the king isn't looking. That's all a kingdom ever was. Underneath the crowns and the thrones and the halls, built to make you feel small. We're going to build the part that works, and leave off the part that doesn't. Maeve looked at her for a long moment, and something in the old woman's face that had been braced for grief eased into something else, something closer to the look she must have worn. Watching a girl she pulled out of the dirt learn to read a trail. You know, she said, I have waited my whole life to hear someone say that out loud and mean it. She reached for her stick. I'll blow the horn. We'll pause here just a moment. If you'd like to see how Sable builds it, and what happens when the crown finally comes looking, stay with us. And if these stories are worth your evenings, follow along so the next one finds you. That winter, the pack mothers came. They came in 2s and 3s over the high passes, some who had not spoken to each other in years, some who had feuded until Sable brokered the peace that stopped it, and they gathered in the stone hall with no throne in it. And they argued, because free people always argue, and Sable let them. She had learned that much from watching Corwin fail at it. A council was not a thing you commanded. It was a thing you tended, like a fire, feeding it the dry arguments and letting the wet ones burn down to something usable. She did not sit at the head of the hall, because there was no head. She sat where she could see faces, and she listened more than she spoke. And when she spoke, it was usually to ask the question that made 2 women who thought they disagreed discover they had been describing the same fear. It took 11 days and very nearly came apart 3 times. The Carn Valley did not trust the high holds, who had raided them within living memory. The Sedge mothers wanted a bigger say for having more people, and the small holds wanted a promise that having more people would never again mean having more say, because that was how the crown had swallowed them in the first place. Sable did not solve these things. She had learned better than to solve a free people's quarrels for them. She built the shape in which they could solve their own. One valley, one voice, the small hold and the great one equal at the flat table, and any matter that touched 2 valleys settled by all of them, and not by whichever was stronger. They named it the Tessellate, in the end, from an old border word for the way the boundary stones fit together, many pieces making one unbroken line, no single stone holding up the rest. Each valley kept its own pack mother and its own say. Each sent one voice to the winter hall. No one sat higher than anyone else, because there was no higher to sit. Sable had seen where a manufactured height led, and she built the hall on the flat. "It won't hold," said one of the Carn mothers. On the last night, not unkindly, "Nothing without a head to it holds. You'll see. Give it a hard year, and they'll be begging for a king to blame." "Maybe," Sable said. "But a thing with a head can be cut off at the neck. Ferris Quell has spent 2 years proving how. I'd rather build a thing he can't behead, even if it's slower, even if it argues, even if it drives us all to distraction. A slow thing that survives beats a fast one that doesn't." She looked around the hall. "And if I'm wrong, if it flies apart in a hard year, then we'll have lost nothing. We weren't already losing to a crown that never came when the grain didn't. I'll take that wager, will you?" The Carn mother looked at her a long moment, and then she spat in her palm and held it out across the flat table, the old way, the way the border sealed a thing when it meant it. "I'll take it," she said. And, one by one, down the long table, the others did the same. It should not have worked. That was what the South would say afterward, the lords and the clerks who understood power only as a thing that flowed down from a point. It should not have worked. A kingdom with no king, a council of quarreling mountain women, a border that governed itself by argument and boundary stones. It should have flown apart in a season. It did not fly apart. It grew. It grew because it solved things. And the South's arrangement, increasingly, did not. When a grain train was raided in the Carn Valley, the Tessellate had riders on the passes within the day, because the riders lived a valley over and did not need a warrant from 3 days south. When 2 holds fell out over water, the matter went to the Winter Hall and came back settled, by people who would have to look each other in the eye at the next thaw. When a hard frost took the seed corn in 3 high holds, the low valleys sent up their surplus, not as charity which humiliates, but as a loan the Winter Hall recorded and the holds repaid at harvest, because a thing you build together is a thing you do not let starve. Sable rode more than she ever had, not as a warden now, but as something the old languages didn't quite have a word for. A person who carried the council's decisions between the valleys and made sure the pieces stayed fitted. Bram Olet, who was 15 now and growing like a weed, ran the high passes as her chief messenger and swore the Tessellate ran on his supper, the way it always had. The work was not clean, and it was not quick, and Sable came to love it. Precisely for that a crown decided a thing in a morning and spent a year discovering it had decided wrong. The Winter Hall decided nothing in a morning, and so it very rarely had to unmake anything at all. She watched 2 mothers who had loathed each other for a decade sit across the flat table over a matter of grazing rights, and forced to keep looking each other in the eye, because there was no throne to appeal over the other's head to. Discover by the 3rd day that they had both been fighting a dead grandfather's quarrel and neither of them could remember why. That was the thing. The South would never understand, she thought. Power that flowed down from a point taught everyone beneath it to look up. Power laid flat taught them to look across, at the face of the person they would have to live beside when the arguing was done. It was slower. It was so much slower. But a thing settled across a table stayed settled in a way that a thing handed down never did. And steadiness, Sable had decided, was worth more than speed to a people who had spent generations being governed fast and badly by men 3 days away. And the Reach, which had been the poorest and most neglected corner of the realm, began, quietly, to prosper, not richly, but steadily, which was better, because steadily was a thing you could plan a life around. Water of it drifted south the way smoke drifts, and lowland holds on the Crown's own maps, the ones the Crown's courts had let rot for a decade, began to send quiet envoys asking whether the Tessellate might settle a matter their own magistrates had tangled past untangling. A boundary dispute between 2 lowland farms, a widow's inheritance, 3 lords had bled dry. In fees, Sable took each request to the Winter Hall, because it was not hers to grant. The Winter Hall said yes more often than not, and charged nothing, but the promise that the ruling would be honored, and with every yes, the thing she had built reached one valley further down toward the soft green country, one stone further along the unbroken line. It was not conquest, no banner moved. It was only that when people are given a choice between a court that works and one that doesn't, they will walk a long way to the one that works, and they will bring their neighbors. She did not let herself think about Corwin. She was mostly successful. There were nights, riding a cold pass under hard stars, when the memory of a small fire on a ridge came at her sideways and caught her under the ribs, and she let it, for exactly as long as it took to cross the pass, and then she put it down. He had had her. He had not been willing to be seen holding her. That was a whole and finished thing, and Sable did not reopen finished things. If some traitor part of her kept the boundary token's absence like a missing tooth her tongue went back to, she did not admit it, even to Maeve, who noticed anyway and said nothing, which was its own kind of mercy. Once, cresting the high pass above the cairn in a hard blue dusk, she found herself banking her cook fire against the wind the way she had taught a king to do it, and she caught her own hands at the work and held them still a moment, furious at them, and then finished the banking anyway, because a cold night did not care whose lesson had taught the trick. She had wanted. That was the plain and unwelcome truth of it. Not the crown, not the throne, not any of the things a woman was supposed to want from a king. Only the fire in the plain, look across it, and the man who, for the length of one night, had wanted nothing back. She had let herself imagine keeping it, and imagining had cost her, and she did not intend to pay that particular toll twice. So she banked her fire and ate her supper alone and rose before light, and if the missing tooth ached, well, aches were only the body's way of insisting a thing had once been whole. What she did not know, because the Reach did not trade in southern gossip, was that the crown was rotting from the head down. Ferris Quell had walked out of that council hall untouched, and a man who beats his king in his king's own hall does not grow more loyal afterward. The road through the Wend had died in the scandal, as Sable had known it would, but Ferris had turned even that to use, whispering through the winter that the young king was reckless, that he chased mountain fancies and burned the crown's coin on roads to nowhere, that a placeholder king was all he had ever been. He was patient, which is the most dangerous thing an ambitious man can be. He did not reach for the crown. He simply made himself one favor and one debt, and one quiet purse at a time, into the man the council went to when it wanted a thing done, until the day came when going to the king, for it seemed a needless extra step. The council that had merely mistrusted Corwin began, under Ferris's patient hand, to rout around him entirely, and Corwin, who had thrown away the one person who could not be bought precisely because being seen with her was too costly, found that he had kept instead a court full of people who could all be bought and had been, and not by him. The envoy from the crown came up the passes at the end of the second winter, and he did not come with a summons. He came with his hat in his hands. Sable received him in the winter hall on the flat, with the pack mothers seated around her, and she watched the man's face as he took in the thing he had climbed 3 days to find. Not a rebel warlord's camp, not a mob, but a working government, orderly and unhurried and entirely unfrightened of him. She almost pitied him. He had been sent to negotiate with a grievance, and had found a nation instead. His Majesty, the envoy began, and stopped, and started again. His Majesty sends his respect to the Council of the Reach. His Majesty, said Maeve Tor dryly, has learned some manners in 2 years. Sit down, Southerner, before you fall down. You've had a hard ride. They fed him, because the Reach fed everyone, and when he had eaten, he laid the crown's trouble on the flat stone table, and it was worse than even Sable had guessed. Ferris Quell had moved openly at last. He held the votes of 2/3 of the council. The treasury was answering to him and not the crown, and in a month's time he meant to put a question to the assembled lords that a placeholder king could not survive. whether the realm might be better served by a steward of proven blood than by a second son who had never been meant to rule. It was a coup with good table manners, and it would work. And His Majesty, Sable said, having spent 2 years teaching his council, that my word was worth nothing, now finds his own is worth nothing either, and he has sent you to me. She did not smile. It would have been cruel, and she found, somewhat to her own irritation, that she did not want to be cruel about this. Why, what does a drowning king imagine the Reach can do for him? The envoy swallowed. He does not imagine the Reach can do anything for him, he said. He was most particular that I say so, he said. The man closed his eyes, plainly reciting. He said, "Tell her I am not asking the Tessellate to save the crown. Tell her the crown does not deserve saving, and I have finally understood that she knew it before I did. Tell her, Ferris Quell will not stop at the crown. A man who murders for a road will not leave a self-governing Reach, standing on his northern border once he holds the south. Tell her I am not asking her to fight for me. I am warning her, because it is the one thing I still have the right to do for her, and then I will trouble her no further." The hall was silent. The pack mothers looked at Sable, and Sable Vosh sat on the flat among the equals she had made, and understood that the finished thing was not finished after all, and that the man who had been unwilling to be seen holding her had in the end sent her the one message that asked her for nothing at all. It would have been easier if he'd begged. A beggar, she could have refused. This was a man handing her the truth free of charge and expecting nothing back, which was the one thing she had ever asked of him, and the one thing he had never once managed while it might have saved him. And the timing of it now, when it cost her everything and him nothing, was so like him that she almost laughed. "He's right about Quell," she said at last, to the hall, not to the envoy. "That's the trouble. He's right. A man like Ferris cannot let us stand. If he takes the south, he comes north within the year, and he comes with an army, and he comes to a border that fed his ambition once already." She stood. "This is not the crown's war we'd be riding to, whatever the South will say of it. It's ours, come one season early, and I would rather fight it on their ground while they are still divided than on our passes after Ferris has spent a year making the South one fist." She looked around the flat table, mother to mother. "I built this so it would work when no king was looking. Let's find out if it works when every king is." They did not send an army. The Tessellate had no army. That was rather the point of it. What the Tessellate had was something Ferris Quell had never once had to reckon with, and did not know how to fight. A border full of people who could not be bought, organized by a woman who could not be lied to, moving through country that answered to her and not to him. Sable went south, with a plan built the way she built everything, out of attention and patience, and other people's underestimation. She took no banner and no host, only a dozen wardens who could read a registry and a valley both. Maeve Tor, who wanted to see the South fall on its own sword before she died, and Bram Olet, who was 16 now and refused to be left behind and was besides the fastest thing on the passes. She did not march on Halvery. She unmade Ferris Quell the way she had first found him, one true paper at a time. Orem Ket, the man who had pushed the foreman in the wind, the man who would only speak far from Quell's reach, spoke now, at length, to 3 pack mothers and a lowland magistrate. The Tessellate had settled a dispute for the winter before, and his words were written down and witnessed and copied 3 times over, so that no single fire could make them a convenience again. The 4 quiet names that had bought the northern passes were traced, by wardens who read a land registry the way other people read a face, to a dozen more, and every one of them led back to the same folded hands. And the lowland holds that Ferris meant to rule, the ones whose rotted grievances the crown had ignored and the Tessellate had quietly settled, discovered in themselves a startling reluctance to be ruled by the man whose coup would end the only council that had ever answered them. Sable did not have to raise them. She had only to let them understand what they stood to lose, and they raised themselves, quietly, in the way of people who have finally found something worth keeping. Ferris Quell had built his power the southern way, flowing down from a point. Sable took the point away and let the rest fall, and it fell fast, because a thing that hangs from a single stone always does. The treasury clerks, seeing which way the season turned, remembered their loyalty to the crown a full week before it would have been fatal to forget it. The council lords who had been ready to name a steward of proven blood discovered pressing reasons to be elsewhere. By the time Sable came down out of the passes, Ferris Quell held nothing but the shape of his power, and shapes, as any warden could tell you, do not stop a cold wind. She came to Halvery on a grey morning at the end of the mud season, 2 years almost to the day since she had first ridden down out of the mountains, feeling smaller with every mile. She did not feel smaller now. She rode through the manufactured gate, under the too-high arch, built to shrink a body, and it did not touch her, because she had built a hall with no height in it at all, and she knew now which one was the trick. The council was in session. She walked into it unannounced, in her riding coat, with a lowland magistrate on one side of her and Maeve Tor on the other, and a sworn confession in her hand, and 24 fine coats turned to stare, and at the head of the table Ferris Quell rose with his courteous smile already in place. "The warden returns," he said. "And what does the little mountain council imagine it is doing in the heart of the realm? Settling a matter your courts let rot," Sable said, and laid the confession on the table. "It's what we do now." She did not look at Corwin until it was done. She made herself finish the work first, because the work was why she had come, and the man was not. Or so she told the cold, clear thing in her chest. And it half believed her. She laid it out on the long council table the way she had laid out the first proof in the map room a lifetime ago, plainly, in order, giving the room no space to look away. The confession of Orm Kett, witnessed and copied. The traced names. The testimony of the lowland holds. She named the foreman Ferris had ordered killed, and she named the 4 false buyers and the dozen more behind them, and she named the coup for what it was, and she did it in the flat, even voice of a woman who had brokered 11 truces and broken none, and the fine coats who had mistrusted a young king found that they could not, this time, mistrust their way out of the truth, because it did not come from a crown they doubted. It came from a border that had spent 2 years quietly becoming the only thing in the realm that worked. Ferris Quell did not run this time either. But this time, it did not save him. When he turned to the council to work his old trick, to ask who brought these papers and why she might be believed, he found the council no longer looked to him because the treasury he had captured had already remembered its loyalty, and the lowland holds he had meant to rule had already found a better place to send their trust. He had built his power flowing down from a point, and Sable had spent 2 years teaching half the realm to live without a point at all. He looked for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had been reading a map upside down and had only now turned it the right way round. The guards who took him were lowland men, whose water dispute the winter hall had settled. He went out of the hall, not smiling, and the door easing shut behind him made exactly the sound his voice had always made, and then it was quiet. And then, because there was no longer anything else to do it behind, Sable looked at the king. Corwin Alder had aged more than 2 years in 2 years. He stood at the head of his own table, like a man who had been holding a door shut against a storm for a long time, and had just felt it stop pushing. And he was looking at her the way he had looked at her across the maps in the gold light, except that there was no gold light now. Only the grey morning, and 24 witnesses, and everything he had thrown away standing in a riding coat in the middle of his hall, having saved his crown without once being asked to. "You didn't come for me," he said. His voice was rough. It was not a question. He had learned at last not to make her answer the ones he already knew. "No," Sable said. "I came because Ferris Quell would have come north within the year, and I fight my wars on my own schedule now, not his. You were right about that, and it cost you something to send that warning and ask for nothing, and I noticed. That's all it was. I know. He came around the table, and the room held its breath. 24 fine coats watching their king walk down off nothing at all toward a mountain woman, and he stopped a careful distance from her, exactly the distance she had once taught him to keep. I'm not going to ask you for anything. Sable, I lost the right to ask you for anything in this room, and I know it, and I'd rather lose the crown than pretend I didn't. I only want to say the thing I wouldn't say last time. In front of them, because the whole of what I did wrong was that I wouldn't. He turned to the council, the men who had thought him a placeholder, and he said, in a voice with no performance left in it at all, 2 years ago this woman brought me the truth about the road and the man who murdered for it, and I let you talk me out of being seen to believe her, because I was afraid of what it would cost me with you. I told the room her findings would be reviewed. There was nothing to review. I had ridden that ground myself and seen with my own eyes that every word she spoke was true, and I let a murderer walk out of this hall smiling rather than admit in front of you that I had. It cost me everything it was ever going to cost me, and it cost her more, and she went home and built a government in the mountains that has just saved the crown. I was too frightened to defend with a single honest sentence. There is no throne in her hall. I have come to think that is the wisest thing anyone in this realm has ever built, and I was too small to see it when it was standing in front of me holding a map. He turned back to Sable, that's all. I needed the room to hear it because you stood in this room and watched me be a coward, and it was only right you stand in it and watch me stop. You can go home now. I understand if home is the last place I have any part in. And Sable Vosh, who had ridden 2 years and a whole nation's distance from the map room, who had built the thing that needed no king, precisely so that she would never again wait to be made real by a man who couldn't look at her, stood in the too-high hall and felt the cold, clear thing in her chest turn over all the way it had at a small fire on a ridge, and this time she did not stop it, because she had finally built enough ground under her own feet that she could afford to. Say it looking at me, she said quietly. That was always the only part I needed, and he did. He looked at her, in front of all of them, with nothing in his face to hide behind. And he said it again, just to her this time, 3 words, with no counsel, and no crown, and no calculation left in them at all, and she let herself hear them. But she did not stay. That was the thing the room did not expect, and the thing she needed them all to see. She gathered her papers, and she nodded to the king as an equal nods to an equal, and she went home, because a woman who had built a country to prove she needed no one's permission to be real did not then dissolve into the arms of the first man who finally said so. The saying was not the winning of her. It was only the price of admission to the long, slow work of earning her, and she meant to make him pay every coin of it, and she meant to enjoy watching him try. She went home. That part never changed. She would always go home, and any man who wanted a place in her life would have to understand that home was north and high and cold and hers. What changed was that, this time, when spring opened the passes, the king came up them. He came the way she had first learned to like him. Alone, in a plain coat, with no crown, and no guard, and no counsel at his back, a tired man on a good horse, climbing into the gray teeth of the reach, because the thing he wanted was up there and would not be summoned down. He came to the stone hall with no throne in it, and he did not ask to sit at its head, because he had finally understood there was no head to sit at, and he took the seat the pack mothers offered him on the flat, like everyone else, and Maeve Tor watched him do it with the look of a woman revising a long-held opinion by a single grudging degree. He did not ask Sable to marry him that spring. He had learned the shape of her by then, and he knew that a man who had once refused to be seen holding her did not get to arrive a year later and ask to hold her forever, as though the refusing had never happened. So he did the other thing. He asked the tessellate whether the crown might send a voice to the winter hall, not to rule it, not to command it, but to sit on the flat and be one stone in the line, like all the rest, so that the south and the reach might fit together the way the boundary stones did. many pieces and no single one holding up the others. He came, in other words, not as a king offering to take them in, but as a hold asking to be let into a thing that already worked. It was the humblest thing anyone in the room had ever seen a crown do. The Winter Hall argued about it, because free people always argue. The Carn mother, who had wagered against the whole endeavor and lost the wager gladly, argued loudest of all that a king let in on the flat was still a king, and bore watching. And then, having argued, it said yes, on the condition that the South's voice could be outvoted like anyone else's, which the king accepted so quickly that even Maeve was forced to admit he might, against all odds, have learned something. He earned the rest, slowly, the way the riverbank is lost, a grain at a time, except in the other direction, towards something instead of away from it. He came up the passes when he could. He learned to argue in a hall where being king bought him nothing, and to lose an argument without sulking, which took him longer. He was, the pack mothers admitted, a quick study, once you took the throne out from under him. And one ordinary summer evening, on a ridge above the Sedge Valley, where a road had never gone, at a small fire that was the whole warm world for a mile around, Sable Vosh looked at the man across the flames, who had finally learned to look back at her, and she was the one who asked. "You proposed to me first, if you recall," she said, "with a road and a lie, and I had to build a nation to get over it. I'd rather do the next part myself." She let him wait because she had earned the letting. "Marry me, Corwin. Not to join the reach to the crown, not to fit any pieces together, not for any reason a council could write down. Just because I've decided I want you, and I've built enough ground to stand on that. I can want a thing for no reason but wanting it, and be sure the wanting is mine, and nobody's permission." He was quiet a moment, the fire moving in his eyes, and she saw him understand that she was giving him the thing he had failed to give her, the plain words said where it cost her, with witnesses only in the form of the stars. "There's a hall full of pack mothers who'll want a say," he managed. "Let them argue. I've made up my mind." She almost smiled. "No take-backs." "No," Corwin agreed. And this time he did not look away, would never again look away. "There's a kingdom on that?" I asked. And then, more quietly, the old dry warmth coming back into his voice for the first time in 2 years, "Though for the record, Warden, I notice you've waited until you held every card in the realm to say a soft thing to me. You built a country so you could propose from higher ground. I built it on the flat," she said. "There is no higher ground, that's the whole point of it." And she kissed him, and for once, she did not negotiate. The whole reach came out for it, and a fair part of the South besides, the tired king who had learned to sit on the flat, and the warden who had built the thing that needed no king, and taken one anyway, on her own terms, at her own fire, in her own time. Maeve tore, cried, and denied it, and told anyone who would listen that she had known from the first that the girl would do something impossible. She had simply expected fewer weddings and more bloodshed. Ramalette, who was 17 and taller than both of them now, swore the whole nation still ran on his supper and demanded a raise, and got one. By unanimous vote of the Winter Hall, which was the only matter that year the hall did not trouble to argue about. And somewhere in the great house, far to the south, in a map room, where the long gold light still came down through the high windows, a small pale disk of horn, scored with crossed lines, sat on the sill, where a king had kept it for 2 years. Marking the edge of a thing he had once thrown away, and spent the rest of his life being grateful he was given the chance to walk back across one grain of the riverbank at a time, in the only direction that had ever been worth the walking.